Well, hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Neil Chase. I'm the CEO here at CalMatters, and I'm with Samia Kamal, who covers politics for us, which we're going to talk a lot about in a couple of minutes here. Our goal today is to tell you a little bit about the voter information that's available for the upcoming election, especially the CalMatters voter guide and some of the resources that we have for you, and a little bit about what's behind it, a little bit about how to use it, and how we hope that many people here will help us put this in front of as many people in California as would like to have it, so that people who are voting in California this year can have as much information as they possibly can. I want to start with a big thanks to our friends at the California State Library who make this possible. They've supported us creating curriculum and materials for libraries and schools, and this is a part of that, to create these webinars, both so that our library partners can learn what's available and how it might be best used, and also, to the extent you wish, to share this with your patrons and communities, and hopefully it's helpful to everybody. I want to get started real quickly. Samia, I'm going to ask you to give us a very short background on your history, and especially how you kind of came to be a politics reporter.
Sure. So I grew up in Southern California. I have been at CalMatters for about close to 3 years now on the politics team. And how did I get into politics? I think it was in small pieces, along the way. I worked on the digital side of the LA Times and at the Center for Public Integrity. So just being surrounded by a lot of, policy and accountability reporting, and eventually transitioned into reporting myself.
That's wonderful. We're excited to have you here, and you came here with a set of experience a lot of people don't, in terms of what it actually takes to build a news website and get it out there in front of people. It's a lot of work. And so I like to think that you do your reporting with a little bit of a, what's this going to look like when people see it, in mind, which I think has to be part of how you think about creating a voter guide, right? Our voter guide is certainly the product of a lot of people's work. It is reporters, it is editors, it is people on our product team who do the design work and the coding work to make everything come together. It's the sponsors who support it, and it is everybody who helps distribute this information to voters, right? The whole idea is that the more information voters have, and the more accurate information voters have in their hands, the better informed they'll be and the better decisions they'll make at the polling place. Talk a little bit, if you would, about the planning process, like how long ago we started thinking about the voter guide and kind of what it takes to bring it together. What sort of information we make sure we pull in.
Yeah, I feel like the earliest conversations I remember were actually in 2022 as we were wrapping up the last voter guide. We were thinking about, well, what do we want to do next time? What feedback did we get? How can we make this more useful? And I think, like you said, it's everything that we get back from readers and people who have used it, as well as our own experiences. I mean, I've been reporting on California politics for about 3 years, and I still have to, double check that things are correct. I mean, there's been so many changes to election policies and the way that we vote. And, there's been a lot of efforts by the state to make voting easier and more accessible, more convenient. And so being able to keep up with those, using my own experience of what do I need to know. And I think we kind of all pool that together on our team and put that into this guide.
Yeah, and you talk about the changes to the voting process. There are, I don't know, was it 15 or 20 different laws last year to make small incremental changes to the voting process, to make it easier to vote, to make it let you take a ballot to any polling place and turn it in without the envelope, that sort of removing the hurdles. And of course, not every state does it the same way. Some states have done things that some folks think makes it harder, but it does feel like the California legislature has been trying to create ways for more people to vote, right, and make it easier. Um, Talk a little bit about the structure of the voter guide, like what's in it and what are the most important things we hope somebody takes away from it if they have a chance to look at it, but maybe not spend as much time as you might reading every word in it, because there's so much in there.
Yeah, I think, well, there's sort of your quick reference facts, key election dates and frequently asked questions about how to vote or, about the races themselves. But I think largely the context that we're adding to these races, what are the key races, what are, the background on each of the candidates, as easy as possible to quickly identify who the candidates are, what parties they're from, what they stand for, who's giving them money. So that would be, I think, a lot for people to try to learn on their own. And I know we have several different voter guides that sort of walk you through how to vote, where to vote. But I think we're trying to bring in both the best of both worlds of context and also the how to. Um, yeah.
Yeah. And certainly, when you go into the CalMatters voter guide, which is available on our website, you can see the link here in the chat. And it'll be available on a lot of other websites as well. You have a chance to go in and read about the biggest races that are going on in the state, the statewide campaign for the senator who's going to replace Dianne Feinstein in her seat, in a very confusing election because you got to pick somebody to do the last 2 months of the old term and then the full 6 years of the new term. But then we also have a lookup tool, right? You can look up your address and you'll be able to find things that are related to the place where you live. And then you mentioned campaign finance, which is a lot of people talk about it. It's an important thing, but I don't know, what can somebody do with the campaign finance data, right? If I go look at the campaign finance data, aside from finding out that the candidate has a lot of money, what kind of things do you expect people to look for and find going through that campaign finance data?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's about finding the candidate that aligns with you in some ways. You can see which industries or which groups, whether it's unions or real estate groups that are backing this candidate, or if they're self-funded. And we try to bring the context of what that means. Being self-funded means, do they have less support from their pool of constituents? And so just trying to arm people with that information. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a way to almost check it. And so we have endorsements in there as well, right? You can see who's endorsed which candidates and who supports which ones. But of course, it's a big chunk of money is an endorsement as well. And so if an organization that you have a feeling about, positive or negative, is supporting one of your candidates, that's the information that you want to have in there. Um,
Yeah.
One of the challenges I think people have is there's so many things on the ballot that are just hard to understand, right? And one of the biggest things we have on the ballot right now is ballot proposition number 1 around mental health. And I wonder if it's worth just spending a minute talking about what's in that proposition and how to think about what is on the ballot in that proposition and kind of what happens if you vote yes or vote no.
Yeah, so this is part of the Newsom administration's push to fund, the initiatives to address homelessness in the state. So that includes care courts, as well as some, behavioral health, mental health programs. And it would also basically it would not only have a bond measure, but also change the way some of the funding is done. That would divert some money from clinics. So that has been some of the opposition to it is, who gets to manage the money at the county level, and what impacts that shift of funds would have. So, there's been a lot of laws to try to address this, but I think putting it to the voters is, a way to see where where California in general is at on these issues and what they want to see done.
Yeah, it's a fascinating concept, right? We have a legislature that we elect to make laws for us, but we also put some things out there on the ballot for people to vote on, either the ones that have big public expenditures, or sometimes the ones the legislature can't agree on, right? Or the ones that certain people want to get on the ballot, or that a lot of citizens want to get on the ballot. And those ballot propositions, I think some folks aren't always clear. When that thing gets passed, it is law. It is the law of California, and it has to go into effect and be implemented, which is it's a pretty powerful thing to be able to do with your pencil at the ballot box, right? Um,
Yeah.
the other thing that's in the ballot in the voter guide is sort of voter procedures, right? The process of voting, right? Talk, if you would, a little bit about some of the bigger questions people have about voting and what some of the answers are that are in there, the things that you can look up and find.
Yeah, I think, since 2021, or since the pandemic era, we've had mail-in ballots to every registered voter. So I think people are starting to get used to that, but I think there are still some questions that we get and that come up about that. If I drop it off in the wrong county, will it, still go to the right place? When can I drop it off? And that goes back to the Voters' Choice Act, which was passed in 2016, I believe. And it's a voting model that about 30 counties have opted into, and that, you can drop off your ballots 11 days before the election. And instead of, 1 day polling places, you have vote centers. You can go register, you can vote, and so it just again, it's one of the state's ways of making voting more accessible and convenient to more folks.
Exactly. Um, and in the voter guide, there are, you know, the key races everybody has to vote on, right? There's the Senate race statewide, and everybody in California has an assembly member, one of the 80 members of the assembly who represents you, and a state senator who represents you. And some of the state senate seats are, half of the state senate seats are up, and all the state assembly seats are up. So everybody gets to vote on US senator, your member of Congress representing you in DC, and your state assembly and state senate. Talk about some of the other things that are on the ballots in different parts of the state.
Yeah, I think it's well, one thing that is interesting about doing this for the primary is, we have the top two primary system in California. So that means it's going to be the top two candidates from, regardless of their party, will move on to the general election. And I think that's one of the ways that the voter guide really helps, because this is the stage where you're really differentiating between, for example, two Democrats or, maybe two Republicans. And so I think the context that is in the voter guide hopefully is helpful for that. Other races that are on the ballot, I believe that would be just city council and school board and the
That's a
local races
challenge.
where.
It's a challenge, right? It's hard for us to cover all these races around the state, so we're trying to pull information together about that. One of the questions here from Lindsay is about judges, right? There are judges on the ballots in a lot of places, and it's, look, most of us don't know who the judges are or what they do. We certainly don't have the capability to assess that. And I know last election, um, in the in the general election in the fall, we actually added a page about judges and the statewide judge races that are out there. So first of all, what are the plans on covering judges, especially in the later elections? But also, since we can't cover all of this stuff, there are sources out there people can use to learn about their local judges, right? And some of them are the ballot cards you get from an organization you're part of that does the research. In some places, there are local groups that have done some of the research, but these judges are just hard to figure out, right?
Yeah, and I guess maybe that's where like the voter guide could come in handy, is looking at, what is the information we have on different state officers or state races, and maybe applying that to judges. But I think one, like you said, the other guides, the Secretary of State's office puts out their voter guide that at least lists all the names to, do some initial backgrounding. Um, but I think there's also some other, great groups out there. The League of Women Voters that puts out a lot of helpful information, and sort of these other good government democracy groups that are great resources.
Yeah, yeah. And in some communities, news organizations are doing a really good job of writing about, what is in those races, right? So to check in with the newspaper in your community, the nonprofit news sites in your community, the radio and TV stations, some of them are building really good voter guides that dig into local issues. We're going to do our best for the fall, the bigger voter guide that we have more time to put together, to get as many of those resources in there as possible, make them available to everybody. It's a little tougher in the primaries. There are so many things on the ballot. um, the other thing I think that's really confusing to people about the primary is the fact that it is a party election, right? And different parties handle the voting different ways, which is, we can try to explain it. It's worth explaining, but it just seems to be always confusing because there's these roles of the parties and the roles of the state. The state runs the elections, but the parties are actually running some of these elections. And that is confusing, I think, just because it's confusing, right? We can take a shot at explaining it, but it's not easy.
Yeah, I'll take a shot with a disclaimer that, we tried writing about this in a newsletter item, and we got so many questions and we kept trying to reword it to make it more clear. But it is one of those things that is um, the Democratic Party allows anyone, whether they're registered as a Democrat or not, to vote in the primary, as well as some of the other parties. I believe the Libertarian Party and the Green Party. For the Republican Party primary, you do have to be registered as a Republican. And now I believe we are getting close to the window where you would need to re-register, I believe, if you are not registered in the right party.
Or switch parties next week, I think, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, if you haven't registered, you can register at the polling place when you go to vote for the first time. There's another question here about the fall voter guide, Christopher. We're the voter guide that we're building. We will keep building stuff into it. The goal for the fall voter guide is to have it out there and available when the ballots start hitting people's mailboxes in the fall, which is going to be probably the last week of August. I'm sorry, last week of September, right? When ballots start to come out and hit people's mailboxes. We will be building up a lot of this voter guide material before then as well. We hope to do interviews with a lot of the candidates. We hope to do a lot more on people's positions. We do have some good stuff linked out of the voter guide, right? Stories about the positions the Senate candidates have on various issues, some of the coverage that we've already done. And of course, once we get through March 5th, we're going to be down to 2 Senate candidates, and then the race changes personality a little bit. And we really focus on those 2 people. And if it ends up being 2 Democratic candidates who have very similar positions on a lot of issues, it's a lot harder to differentiate, as opposed to if you have 2 people from different parties who are just very different. And so the journalism, the way you do the journalism kind of depends on who's in there, right? And which differences you're trying to explain and accentuate. Sometimes it's obvious and sometimes it's rather subtle.
Yeah, and we have these candidate pages for each of the Senate candidates, for example. But in addition to sort of the basic biographical info or career info, we do also keep the pages updated with stories that we write at CalMatters, but also coverage from other outlets, just so that as much as possible, there's a one-stop shop for trying to see what a candidate is about.
Exactly. And the endorsements, right? We're tracking who endorses those candidates, which media organizations are supporting them, and what we learn from those endorsements. Let me offer one more time to answer any questions anybody has in the chat. Feel free to drop them in there. Now that the voter guide is out, Samia, right, you're 3 weeks away from the primary. What does your agenda look like for the next 3 weeks? What are you focusing on? What kinds of things are you going to be watching and looking at, both over the next couple of weeks and then on election day itself?
Yeah, we have been monitoring, the various Senate debates. We've been watching just the campaigns from assembly members and state senators who are running. What are they? Who are they aligning themselves with, or what issues are they focusing on? And how it relates to kind of what Californians are dealing with at large. So how much are they talking about, wildfire insurance or homelessness, and so it's sort of like how bringing all the pieces together. I think of what we're doing outside, what we hear outside of just elections, and then what the candidates are talking about and what they're not talking about. What issues are falling by the wayside, and what international issues are playing into these local races.
I like how you said very politically nicely there what they're not talking about as opposed to what they're avoiding, right? Which is what we
Right.
really want to see.
Right.
One last thing to share, one of the elements of this voter guide that I especially love is the fact that if you have a question, you can put that question in, you can send that question in. And while some people don't believe this actually happens, we actually will look at the question and try to answer it, right? And that's sometimes easier, sometimes harder. But our goal is to answer your questions. We're publishing the answers to those questions. So we really encourage you to go through the voter guide. If you have questions, if people you work with have questions, you can drop in there. We'll try to answer them as best we can. Especially if you are working with patrons in your community and seeing what people need that isn't in here, some more other information or different ways to do the information. We'd love to know. We do the guide in English and Spanish. We hope to be able to use other languages as well later this year. But always happy to hear feedback on what else would be useful and how best to serve everybody in California who is a registered voter, or even people who are eligible to vote and aren't voting yet, even people who can't vote, people who are undocumented or people who are under the age of 18, learning about the issues. People tend to be influencers on other folks, right? And we want everybody to know as much as they can about what's going on and have conversations in communities about what's going on. The most exciting thing we saw in 2018 was when a library in Alameda County invited a bunch of people in from the community and showed all the videos we had about every ballot proposition and invited a community conversation about that, served pizza, put the whole thing on social media. And it was just fun, and it inspired us to do that in a lot of other places. We're going to try to do that a lot more places, especially this fall for the general election. So with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us for this. Invite your continued questions in that box on the voter guide, and your feedback to us as to how to make this more useful for everybody you work with in the future. And we'll look forward to both doing these conversations once a month about different topics we're making available and getting back to the conversations. I'm sure we'll drag you back in, Samia, in August and September when we're gearing up for the next big election. So thank you for doing this. Thanks again to the team at the California State Library for making this possible and to everybody for joining today. Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye-bye.